and welcome to another month of a book review by me, your host, Peter Wheatmartian. For this month's book review, I read Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed. The book came out in 2020, and it has been on my to-read shelf for probably that entire time. I just finally got around to reading it this month. First of all, I did pick up this book kind of for a couple of different reasons, but for one, I am a huge soccer fan. I've watched a lot of soccer throughout my last 15 or 20 years or so, and Abby Wambach is a player for the U.S. women's national team, or was a women's national team player before she retired. And her and Glennon are now married, so it kind of caught my eye at first because of that. And then also, June, Pride Month, so I thought, what a better way to, celebrate that month than by reading an author from the LGBTQ community, and I thought this would be the perfect time for me to pick up her book that I've always wanted to read, and why not read it now for you to review. So first of all, a little bit about Glennon Doyle. She is a writer. This is her third book. She wrote Carry On Warrior and Love Warrior before this, and Love Warrior, her second book, was actually a part of Oprah's book club. Besides being an author, she also runs a website called Momistry, and she is the founder and part of the people who run the charity Together Rising. She talks about both of those things in the book, but I wanted to mention those just in case you wanted to learn a little bit about who she is. So first of all, I will say that I probably was not the ideal reader for this book. A lot of her writing throughout the book focuses mainly on women, how they can find what she calls their inner knowing, or the truth that lies within them. And it really, if I were to distill this entire book down to just one word, I would say that word would be truth. She sets up this whole truth with a story about how she learned to find her inner knowing. She calls it her inner knowing, capital K-N-O-W. And this is a place of peace and a place of calm that you can find within yourself. You kind of withdraw inside of yourself in order to learn and to know and to understand what is true and right, and what decision you might need to make next to take you to that place of truth and understanding. But really, like I said, it all revolves around knowing your inner truth. It's not so much that the book is about the stories that are contained within it, but it is about finding your inner knowing. One of the quotes that I really enjoyed from her book is, "Every truth is a kindness." Like I mentioned, I'm probably not the ideal reader for this book, but I did still enjoy it. I think that a lot of her writing, even though it is focused on women finding their knowing, finding their inner truth, does really revolve around just being a good human on earth. One of the things that she says, another quote that I found really interesting, was, "The moral arc of our life bends towards meaning." And I really do think that even I was able to find some meaning, some truth within my own life as I read through this book. Just going into her writing a little bit, because I did enjoy her writing. Her chapters throughout the book are mostly shorter chapters. A couple of them were a couple of paragraphs long. Some of them still were 1 or 2 pages long, and then there were a few longer chapters within, but there's a good variety. But the thing that I really did like about it was that they were shorter chapters, and each chapter had its own story, which meant that I was pretty much able to continue reading. It was kind of hooked. It was kind of a page turner, if you will. I loved throughout the book how she would use stories from her past to illustrate what she wanted to get across in today's world. She wasn't necessarily, saying that everything she did in her life was true and correct either. She wasn't hesitate to call out things from her previous books. There was also times where throughout the stories that she was telling, it was almost like she was sitting there next to you, telling you the story, like if she was talking to you from the page. I thought that really came across well within her writing. I did enjoy also too how, chapters set up future chapters, but you didn't really know it at the time. And other chapters would call back to chapters that you had already read, but, it didn't, she didn't necessarily retell that entire story. Yes, books are connected and stories are connected, but, it was truly kind of felt like a mirror to how we live our lives, with a web of interconnecting stories that we don't necessarily know are connecting to each other until, the time comes where we see that connection. And I thought she did a really fabulous job of showcasing that throughout her book by just telling stories that all of a sudden came together and you realized and you understood where they were coming from. Just kind of pull out one of my. There were a couple of good stories, and one of the stories that I did enjoy is she was talking about using cell phones, especially with kids these days, and she was talking to one of her kids about the use of cell phones, and he said that sometimes it almost feels like being connected on your phone was almost like a second job or like a job because you felt like you needed to get back to all of your friends, get back to people who are posting things on social media, etc., etc. And this is probably where my most favorite quote comes from because it does deal with writers. Writers, artists, other people like that. So in her story where she talks to her son about cell phones, one of the things that she almost laments on is that cell phones are taking away boredom from kids because there's always something to do and they have something in their hand that can keep them entertained or keep them not suffering boredom. And what she laments this is because since kids aren't bored anymore, they're not doing the creative things that they used to. So another favorite quote of mine here is, we are raising a generation of writers who will never start writing, artists who will never start doodling, chefs who will never make a mess of the kitchen, athletes who will never kick a ball against a wall, musicians who will never pick up their aunt's guitar and start strumming. I thought this was really important and impactful because, it shows that we don't always have to be entertained, and sometimes our best ideas, our best inspirations, our best work comes from a little bit of boredom that we have. I know I'm one who always has my phone with me. I keep it next to me all the time, and maybe I don't necessarily feel as bored as I used to, and I can tell sometimes I don't read as much as I used to. I'm not as creative as I used to be. I don't always pick up my instrument and play my saxophone. Maybe part of that's due to the fact that I'm no longer being bored and being okay with it being bored and learning and discovering new things. But I thought that was just a really great story, and I think that was it's pretty important that we all understand that sometimes it's okay to be bored. Moving on, she also throughout the book isn't afraid to call out difficult topics or talk on different subjects, subjects that you don't necessarily, would not necessarily think she would talk about. A lot of them you would, but, she speaks openly about her first marriage and how she's no longer married to her first husband. She talks about things like feminism and sexuality and gender norms and racism and equality and religion, and it's really interesting because her first book was written from the perspective of a Christian woman going through what she went through in her first marriage. And you don't necessarily think all of these themes and subjects would come from a writer with that background, but she does a really wonderful job of combining all of what she has lived through and putting it through a lens that that readers can connect with. These things are not necessarily incompatible with each other, and I think she does a really good job of bringing together her entire life and sharing that with the reader throughout her book. Like I said, she isn't really afraid to talk about her successes or her failures within each of those topics. And just another thing that I enjoyed, coming more from my perspective, as a man reading this book, it was a little, like I said, I'm not the ideal reader, but I did find this part really interesting, where she was talking about one chapter on gender norms, and she specifically says that she raised her daughters within the frame of feminism, and how they can break free from some of the norms that the society around us has placed on women and girls growing up. But then throughout this, she says all of the good things that she does with her daughters to let them live their own life and be free and be what she says wild, with going back to the preface of the book, where she talks about a cheetah at a cheetah run near a zoo near her. So letting her daughters live a life like that. But then she also realizes that for as much help as she gave her daughters to break free from that, she never really thought about how her son could do that, how he could break free from some of the norms set down from men in our society, and how they can, just the gender norms that we as a society place on our kids and how they are raised. And I thought that was really interesting. Definitely would suggest reading the book just for these stories that I have been sharing so far. Like I mentioned, a lot of her book is really reaching inside of yourself, is teaching you how to reach inside yourself to understand and to learn the truth and the knowing you have within yourself. And that knowing, that truth that you have deep inside you, doesn't necessarily always match up to what the world expects of us. She says that we're placed in cages and that we must learn to live outside of those cages. Use the truth, use that knowing, use that whatever you call that within your mind, within your heart, to discover what you must do to live free. One of the big things that she talks about is she raises this question, or a person who went to one of her talks raised the question, why is everyone so gay today? Something to that effect. I forget the exact quote. And one of the things that she comes across and she settles in on is, she says, people aren't changing after all. It's just that for the first time, there's enough freedom for people to stop changing who they are. So looking back on this book, like I said, it talks about a lot of different things, but it really kind of feels a little bit like a memoir. It's definitely a memoir. It definitely has themes of a memoir, but it also has a lot of self-help topics as well. But again, even outside of that, it's almost a part philosophical book, because she dives so much into how people, humans, how individuals can live within the world and interact with the world, and how philosophy kind of wraps together. So I thought it was a really interesting read, just because it doesn't necessarily fit squarely into one box. And I think that's really what really successful books do, is they can, they're broad, but they're yet still entertaining and still focused on one subject. And I thought she did a wonderful job with that. I think reading this book, first of all, it's probably the quickest read I've had. I sat down for like 2 days and read it in 2 days. It's been a while since I've been able to do that, so definitely enjoyed reading the book. But it helped me kind of place myself in her shoes. Maybe not necessarily in her shoes exactly, but it did let me understand how life was through her perspective. And, I think that's truly what makes a good book. A good book expands our horizons, expands our viewpoints, lets us connect and understand what other humans are going through on Earth, because we only really have one time to live here. So let's make sure we're present and available to live our lives. And I think she does a really good job of helping you do that. Life is not the same for each of us, and if we can read different points of view, different perspectives, we can kind of connect with not just ourselves and the people that live right next to you, but people across the world. And I think that's the beauty of a really well-written book. Even going through this book, I can tell you I learned not just about her, but it let me learn a little bit about myself as well. We each must live our own lives. We must make sure that we live it in a way that expresses our inner truth. Probably one of the more poignant quotes that I came across through here is, if this is our shared human experience, where did we get the idea that there is some other, better, more perfect, unbroken way to be human? Now, I do want to leave you with a funny quote because, like I mentioned, I'm a soccer fan. I've watched soccer for a while. Near the end of the book, she says that she was watching her now wife, Abby Wambach, play soccer with her now ex-husband. They play on the same soccer team, and she was saying that she was sitting there watching them play soccer when a lady next to her said, "Wow, my God, that woman looks exactly like Abby Wambach." And Glennon turns to her and says, "That woman is Abby Wambach." I just thought that was pretty funny. So I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble on about this book. Like I said, I did enjoy this book. I would probably give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I would definitely suggest you to pick up this book. Speaking from my perspective, I'm sure that most women out there would enjoy reading this book because I think she does speak well to that side of things. But if you're also a man, I don't think this is a bad read at all. I think this is a good read, and maybe it will expand your horizons as well to read what she's been through in her life. So, like I mentioned, I think this is a good book. If you enjoy reading memoirs, especially, I think you would enjoy her story. And I also think that it brings together not just memoirs, but like I mentioned, philosophy, self-help, a little bit of everything. And I think there's something that anyone can enjoy. I also just enjoy her writing style, like I mentioned. It was a pretty quick read for me. It's kind of a page-turning book. So, if you're looking for a quick read, I would suggest this as well. So that means that we are done with July's book review. However, that means that I also have to start looking forward to the August book review. I don't really, I want to preface this by saying I've been reading a lot of older books that have been out for a few years. But if you know of a book that is newer or a fresh book, if you will, let me know. I'd love to maybe read it, take a look at it, see if it would fit into one of the book review segments that we have coming up. Just feel free to reach out to the Author's Voice wherever we're at on social media. But for August, hey, guess what? We're starting school. I actually talked with the author of this book, Becca Block. She was on an episode a few weeks ago. Actually, if you're listening to this as the day that it came out, it was last week. If you're listening to it after the release week, it was beginning of July. But she has a book that is actually coming out this week. And I talked to her about it, and I think for my August book review, I am going to review her book because I spoiler alert, I'm doing a book review for her as well, so you'll see that on Amazon. But I'll do a full video essay report on it here on the Blank Page to Bestseller podcast. But her book is How to Give a SHIT. So I will read that. If you are interested in reading that book is well with me as I'm going through it, please feel free to do so. Let me know if you have any questions about it or anything that you found interesting. That means that in August, first week of August is when this will come out, so please keep an eye out for that, and we hope that you enjoyed this book review. Without further ado then, I'm going to say have a great week, and we'll be back next week with another great episode of the Blank Page to Bestseller podcast.